Thank you for coming to the talk on machine learning in the age of increasing data privacy consciousness. It is very relevant to the talk we just heard. So that's good. There is some continuity. Just give me a second while I bring up my notes. You all can now see what I had prepared. Awkward. Great. Cool. So the day was May 25th, and we all made a lot of new friends that remembered us. These companies were on the lookout for consent. And the fact that so many decided to email you on the same day, and the fact that they're all looking for consent, meant that something important was going on that day. A few of us probably ignored them. A lot of us probably deleted them. I, because my job dictated it, decided to look into it further. And this got us into something interesting. Now, the eagle-eyed among you might have noticed that I didn't read any of them, except for one, and maybe that tells you where my interests lie. So I will be addressing three questions today. Why should I care about data privacy? And this is really coming from a data practitioner's perspective. And I use the term data practitioner to really mean a data scientist, a data engineer, a machine learning engineer, maybe BI person doing some predictive stuff. So it's a catch-all term. Sometimes I use it interchangeably, but that's what I really mean. So why should I care about data privacy? And if I convince you that you should care, then what are some best practices or principles that we can talk about? And in this section, I will really draw in from my experience at Shopify. And also, we hear a lot about, hey, if I actually start following all these privacy laws, is really my creativity, my entrepreneurial spirit really being affected? And in this section, I will tackle the topic of, hey, does this really have to be a win-lose situation, or can it be a positive-sum game? So a little bit about me. My name is Sam Talasila, and as I was introduced, I lead a data science team at a company called Shopify. We'll get into them a little bit later. And I build marketing recommendations for merchants that are on our platform in order to help them really make the best use of their marketing dollars. This is my first conference talk, so thank you for being here. And full disclosure, I'm not a lawyer. So take everything I say with a little bit of grain of salt. And as we're in the process of disclosing fully, that's not me. I'm a big fan of a stock photo site called Burst, and a lot of the pictures that I use in my talk today are from there. If you like some of them, we can talk about where I got them after the talk. So why should I care about data privacy? And this is really from the perspective of a data practitioner. So having a terms of service on your website, isn't that enough? Having a privacy.mycompanyname.com, really enough? Isn't this a lawyer thing? Why do I need to care about this? Let me just build my algorithms, is the general thinking around this. And I'm really glad to see that that's changing. But to answer this question, I think we need to take a step back and talk about sort of what is the society we're really living in. And this is the age of disintermediation and personalization. Right? The largest taxi company doesn't own any cars. The largest hospitality company doesn't own any hospitals. That was a joke. Doesn't own any hotels. And the largest retailer doesn't own any inventory, right? So the middleman is being cut away, or in many cases, really being consolidated into a few large companies. And these companies really offer a service that is tailored to every individual that is using their platform, right? So it's the age of disintermediation and personalization. So this means now we have the arrival of data science, right? In order to get personal, you need to build algorithms. In order to, decide ideal pricing, you use some algorithms to figure that out. So all of this is producing a world where really algorithms are ruling the world, right? That shouldn't be news to anyone. So not only has data science arrived, but data is becoming king. Algorithms are more and more being open sourced, right? And that's not the secret sauce anymore. It's really your data and how it's being applied that is the key to finding value from these algorithms and from the data that you have. So more and more, data is becoming the strategic moat. This is the thing that is going to ensure that you can keep competitors at bay, and this is going to ensure that you're really able to provide a service that is valuable and unique to your own customers, right? And customers and consumers are starting to take note as well. This was a recent picture from a show called The Patriot Act that is on Netflix. And they did a show about a big retailer. And the conclusion was, it's actually crazy how much data these large companies have, right? And they're, rightfully so, using that for their strategic advantage. Everything I described to you sounds like it's actually progress. Then what is the problem? Is there something hiding in plain sight? That actually explains the picture that I have up there. So if we go back to the claim that data is our strategic moat, and that really resulted in all sorts of data being collected. The price of storage went down, right? So there's no real cost to actually gathering something, having it in your warehouse, hoping that someday you find use for it, right? And in many cases, the users themselves actually were not aware of what data was being collected, how it's being used. And when they, say, I accept these terms and services, the value that they were really giving away by giving away their data was not very transparent, right? So the customer was giving away data, let's say to connect with their friends. The company was using this data to show them relevant ads. And maybe that exchange of value is very well understood, right? But how about if who I'm friends with was also used to swing an election? Is that now what I signed up for, right? And this really becomes the question that needs to be answered. So should my race, gender, or where I live all be used potentially against me, right? And all of these things are personal to me, and should my privacy be protected? So then there are laws for these, right? There are laws that are protecting me against these. I mean, true, but these laws, some of them were actually written in 1978, right? The world that existed then and the world that exists now is vastly different, right? But the good news is legislatures are taking note. They're coming up with new proposals. And they're really concerned about data being sold and monetized without actually the customers or the consumers knowing about it. They're really concerned about data breaches. And they're really, really concerned about the lack of control that exists, right? And the most famous one that was actually presented in the last talk as well is GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. Now, this went into effect on May 25th, 2016. There was a 2-year grace period that was given to all the companies before they had to implement it. And now this is serious business because it's a regulation. That means when it was passed, it immediately became law in all EU member states, right? And that's a lot of people. So this law actually gives a clear legal definition to what is personal data and how it needs to be collected, how it needs to be processed, and how it needs to involve the customers in deciding what is actually done with the data that is collected. Right? And this can be said in a slightly different way. It's any piece of data that can be linked to an identifiable individual can become PII. So that means the definition is fairly broad, right? And we'll get into that later as well. So this law gives consumers a lot of rights. The right of access or explainability. You have determined something about me, now explain it to me. That becomes a right under this law. Right of rectification. So you have something about me that I deem to be wrong. Give me an opportunity to correct it. That becomes a right. A right to be forgotten. Right to restrict processing. So, okay, give me, personalized ads, but don't share my data with people that can use it poorly. That's a right that's under this law. Right to object and also data portability, right? No more vendor locking. I want my data and I'm going home. Give me my data. So all of these rights are provided for in this GDPR regulation. So this law actually doesn't prevent a whole lot of things. This doesn't mean now you can't use machine learning for anything. All it adds is a layer of complexity that is called consent and how that is managed, right? So nothing is banned. It essentially becomes a compliance burden. And the cost of actually not following these laws are very expensive. I don't know how many of you know, it's actually $20 million or 4% of your global revenue last year, whichever is higher, is serious business. It could put you out of business, and it has. Many people that saw this fines and said, we're not going to be ready, or we don't have the capital to be GDPR compliant, and thus we're going to shut down our company, our store, our online game, etc. All of these happened in reality. And you saw that the day after this regulation came into place, there were actually huge lawsuits that were filed against Google and Facebook the next day. So people are serious, and this is serious business. One caveat though, it has a lot of new language in this law, and many of those have yet to be interpreted, legally. So as the years go by, I think we'll get more and more clarity about sort of the framework in which we can function. So you can think that this is happening in the EU. Why does it really matter to me? And it's not just the EU. Canada, where I'm coming from, recently had a law come out. California proposed this year. And a new one, federally, is being proposed by Senator Wyden as well. So as I was doing research for this, I realized that actually in the United States, individual states dictate a lot of these, and right now there are 48 states that have laws governing data privacy and regulation, right? So in order to be compliant, it's very difficult, so this is an attempt to actually put it all at one level and enforce it globally or federally. So then if we go back to this definition of personally identifiable information, and if any resemblance of this definition is actually used elsewhere, then we need to be serious about this. Because a recent study showed 87% of the US population can be identified just based on 3 data points. That's the date of birth, that's the gender, and also the zip code. So that means if you have all these 3 data points sitting in disparate tables, that's a problem, right? Because all 3 can be combined, and now we can identify a majority of the US population. So hopefully I've convinced you enough that there are now legal reasons why we should care, ethical reasons aside, legal reasons that we should care as data practitioners, because this is affecting the world in which we operate, and we need to take practical steps in order to account for it. Right? I just want to reiterate, all of these laws don't prevent us from doing machine learning, don't prevent us from analyzing things. This adds a compliance burden so that we respect the rights of the consumers that have been given these rights legally. So I will pull out a few principles, not techniques, but principles really that I have found to be useful in my work, and I will lean on some of the things that I've learned at my company as well. So I think as we go into these principles, it might be worthwhile to set the background of the company in particular. So this company is called Shopify, not to be confused with Spotify. It is a leading cloud-based platform that allows people to set up stores online or pop-ups offline, and really takes away the burden of running their store from a back office perspective. So one of the things that we provide as a data team is actually insights so that people can run their stores a lot better. So an example of a store is Red Bull. All of the things they sell online is actually powered by Shopify. Another example is the New York Stock Exchange. And there are about 600,000 other such stores on our platform. So Shopify in the industry is actually known as a Ruby and Go shop. But all of the data team is actually powered by Python. We rely very heavily on PySpark and also more and more now on the TensorFlow stack as well. So as you're designing your pipelines, I think it's now becoming more and more critical that we design them with correction and transparency in mind, right? So as data practitioners, it's not enough for us to just deliver a prediction, but we need to get more and more involved in how these predictions are being surfaced, right? So having built pipelines with correction in mind is actually a right that people get under GDPR, and I'll go through an example of a home card. So these numbers are not true, so no need to pay attention to that. But this is an example of a home card. A home card is a card that shows up in home. Home is our name for the admin that people log into to manage their stores. This is where if they got an order, they would go there to take a look at where they got their order from. This is where they would create discount codes. This is where they would look at analytics to understand, who is coming into their store, how much money they're making, et cetera, et cetera. So really, this is a place for us to, as a data team, have influence on the merchants running and operating their store. So this is one such home card. It says, hey, your conversion rate is similar to other stores in apparel and accessories. So the fact that they're in the apparel and accessories industry, there's actually a machine learning algorithm that looked at everything that they sell, and they said, okay, we predict that you're in the apparel and accessories industry. But if it's not their industry, we should actually give them a chance to correct it. And that's what we do here, where they can click on, hey, this actually is beautiful information, but that's not my industry, right? It's not useful to me. And we allow them to correct it in the same view. We give them other options, and these are actually the second and third highest ranking predictions for the same shop. And if not, they're able to put in what their industry is, and from the drop-down menu that is pre-populated. And when they update their industry, we actually give them a small message saying, hey, we've updated your industry to show you more relevant content. And this is where the transparency part comes in. So we have now tied the loop to what we predicted your industry to be, given you an option to correct it, but also because of the fact that you took the time to do this, we're telling you, hey, we'll use this to provide more value, show you more relevant content, right? And this is a great example of actually baking in not only correction, but working with UX folks to bring in the transparency that, hey, this is a prediction, we're willing to correct it, and also this is the value that you're providing for you. Principle 2, take the time to explain your predictions. So one of the rights under GDPR is the right of explainability, right? And more as our algorithms are becoming black boxes, even as practitioners, we sometimes have a hard time figuring out what is actually going on under the hood. So when a merchant is looking for help or trying to understand why is it that you want me to do this, we should be ready to provide them with an explanation. Now, if it's free, right? If you're saying, okay, here's an ad, maybe it's not as relevant, but if we're asking them to spend money based on our recommendations, then we have to be a little bit more serious. So what we can do here is, baked into our prediction, we can also send what our major features are, right? And I'll show you an example where this plays out beautifully. So Shopify has a chatbot that merchants can employ, And one of the ways we deliver this recommendation is through a chatbot. And this is a sample example. It says, hey, James, we've had more than X number of visitors to our store in the last X days. Let's start a retargeting campaign to remind these visitors that our products, about our products and bring them back to purchase, right? In order to reach our visitor audience, I recommend a budget of X for X amount of days and retargeting campaign on a XYZ ad platform. Can I show you a preview of this campaign? So this is, anyone that's done marketing can already pick out what the major features are that the algorithm was acting on, right? And by really surfacing that right to our merchant, they have a very clear understanding of why we are recommending them the things that we are recommending them. And when we're asking them to spend money, that's really important. Not only is it important, it actually ups our acceptance rate by a magnitude. So here we're really being transparent and we're taking the time to explain our predictions, right? And this builds trust. And we'll get into that a little bit later. So a third example that I have is touching on the principle that I like to call the golden rule. So do what your consumers accept will be done with their data, right? If I am, accepting that you will connect me with my friends and in exchange show me a few ads, I'm accepting of that, right? I'm not unreasonable. That's the cost of free. But if you're saying that you're going to use the same data now to politically change how an election goes through, then I have a problem. So if we follow this golden rule, I think we'll bypass a lot of issues. This, as an example, is part of the orders page. So if our merchant gets an order, this is the page they generally go to. Here they can see, what was the cost of the order. You have a little bit of conversion summary. And also you have a section called fraud analysis. And this is an example of we using, data from our merchants or their customers in order to come up with an algorithm that detects fraud. So fraud is very unique under GDPR because it has a special provision that allows us to use PII data in order to build algorithms that detect fraud. And here, I think it's a great example to go through that actually touches on the previous two principles that I mentioned as well. So simple fraud analysis, right? But we also have a section in there that says view full analysis. So fraud analysis low, that would be our prediction, right? But we go a step further to say, hey, you can actually dig in deeper. And now we have all these indicators for you, right? And those indicators, I blocked them out because they contain some information that I can't share. These are, for that particular order, what their IP address is, right? How far away is their registered credit card from where they're shipping it? All of these, any fraud analysis algorithm would take into account. Now, we give them in detail, hey, these are all the things that come together in coming up with this prediction. So this is explainability, transparency, and also using the information that is provided to us in a way that the merchant expects it, right? And we go a step further. We say, hey, do you want to learn more? And they can click on that and get more information. So you might think here that it's a lot of UX things, but behind all of these are our pipelines and our models that we build and that we put into production. So our sort of responsibility should not end with just a prediction, right? That's the bare minimum that we can do. And providing more information that the UX people can use to actually build a story, really, while satisfying all of the rights that they get under GDPR, is the way to go in this case. And also when we talk about the last principle, it's also important that we use some of the new techniques that are coming on board, right? Designing pipelines with privacy in mind. Things like collecting only what you need, data minimization. As soon as it hits your control, anonymizing it so that everything downstream doesn't have to be PII aware. And using techniques like differential privacy to really minimize your exposure in case of a data breach, among other things. And one of the ways this is nicely achieved is through progressive consent, right? So don't ask for consent and don't collect information if the consumer has not come to a point where they're actually using that aspect of your product. So in the example that I gave of the chatbot, if a consumer is not using our chat solution and is not, accepting marketing recommendations, then don't bother collecting PII information relating to that, right? When they do, when we have their consent, we can go ahead and do that and offer them a fairly solid solution. So I think I've shared with you that things are required legally. I've also given you a few principles how we can sort of take all of these things and put it into our products. But this is something that a lot of people have trouble with. So here is big government really putting the clamps on innovation, right? But does privacy really have to be a zero-sum game? And the hypothesis that I'm pursuing is no. So here's a quote by Dr. Ann Kevorkian. She was the Chief Privacy Officer of the province of Ontario, where the city of Toronto is located, from where I traveled yesterday. And she actually makes a claim that we have now tools that can serve as technologies of freedom. And it's not the dystopian view or the dated view of zero-sum or win-loss models. Simply put, it doesn't have to be a win-loss, it can be a win-win. And this is something that I hope to show a few examples of. So when we were talking about principles, we lightly touched on the element of trust, right? If we're transparent, if we allow our pipelines to be corrected by the users, if we are really harping on the fact that we want to provide value, here's where you can learn more, here's how we're using our data, your data, this really increases trust in our product, right? And if trust is there, then when we do ask for additional consent, more likely to be provided, right? So as we increase trust, as we're transparent about the value that we're providing, this benefits the customer because, they can use our product knowing that we are being honest with them and also are conscious about their privacy. But also from a company's perspective, this really becomes the differentiating factor in a very crowded environment by showing we're a company that believes in your privacy and is using your data in order to service you, and we have no ulterior agenda that you do not know about. Also, our previous talk touched on algorithmic biases and measuring them. A lot of these biases actually originate from personally identifiable information. There are proxies that exist for sure, but race, gender, and all of these PII information actually in the cases that were presented in the previous talk do a lot more harm than good, and you're actively trying to remove them from your predictions. So by actually removing them from your training data in the beginning, you actually have better training data, and you spend less time actually tuning your model to be more fair. And when we take a look at the correction mechanism, or the way to actually have feedback back into your model, you're actually crowdsourcing training data, right? Training data is one of the hardest things to get, good quality training data while you're building algorithms. And what you're saying is, hey, now consumers, if you trust us to use this properly and we have a corrective mechanism baked into our pipelines, we can collect better training data from you. And as a result, we'll give you better predictions and better value. So all of these things are actually both ways. They benefit the company and they benefit the consumers as well. And that, to me, is an example of a win-win. Also, this goes into GDPR a little bit. I think many of us are very familiar with this. We freak out every time we get an email from him. And under GDPR, there are actually strict laws that say how you need to react when you are aware of a data breach. And the less PII information that are stored in our data warehouses, let me tell you, the better, right? Recent emails that I got was about LinkedIn. Another that my cousin got was about Equifax. All of these are major companies that probably host information about majority of the people in this room. And the fact that we don't, from the beginning, choose to follow principles of data minimization and we don't collect information we don't need, it's less headaches later on, right? And that, of course, benefit both the consumers and the company as well. And storage costs are minimum, but it's still a lot of dollars, right? And if it's data that you don't need, that you're processing every day, that's a lot of dollars. Storage and processing, it definitely helps to cut those down when not needed and save a little bit of money there. So in conclusion, I posed 3 questions. Why do I need to care as a practitioner of data science? I think there are strong legal reasons to care. The second question was, what are some principles that I can follow? Please follow the golden rule. And can data privacy be a positive-sum game? And I propose to you that this can be a win-win. So thanks a lot for your time, and that's all I had for today. We have a few more minutes. I can take any questions that might be in the room. Go ahead.
I think as you quite aptly observed, just launching your presentation, one of the problems that has already kind of surfaced is people are being flooded in their inboxes with these notifications about updated privacy policies and data collection policies, this and that. I guess at what point are we going to reach a situation where we have just an overload, a feeling of being overwhelmed by all of these various, tool tips saying, click here for more info, or here's how we're using your info, or please give us consent to do yada, yada, yada. Mm-hmm. It's very difficult for people to stay on top of how to use a product, let alone also understand all the aspects of the pipeline and the data.
Yeah.
Can you just comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. That is being described more and more as consent overload, and that's a real problem. And the way we've sort of found ways around that is through progressive consent. So you give us consent for the part of the product that you want to use. And until then, that is all hidden away from you, right? It's not these broad-based consent that you give us access to everything at all times, but it's really based on the part of the product that you want to use, mapping that back to the consent that we need, and at that time really exposing that to the consumer and asking them to accept. And when it's done in context, then the overload portion is negated quite a bit, right? Instead of when you're signing up to all these forums, and at that point you're not really sure, do I really need this? What is it being used for? But in context, it really helps. But it is a huge problem. I think the UX folks are keenly aware of that. I think they're working on some interesting things around that.